My name is Felipe Ehrenberg. I should be speaking in Spanish rather than English because I'm Mexican. I lived in England for 1968 to 674, more or less 6 years. And during that time, I founded, together with a series of accomplices, a small press, a tiny little insignificant press in the heart of cowland in the southwest of England, Devon. And we called that press Beau Geste Press because I had just seen, one, I had just bought a mimeograph machine, a Gestetner. Two, I had just seen the movie Beau Geste in black and white. And three, because they used the word groovy at that time very often. So my groovy Gestetner came to be called Beau Geste, and that's the name that we gave to our small press, which grew and grew and grew. And here we are 40 years or nearly 50 years later talking about that press. I, as a complete unknown, we sought exile, my children's mother and myself, with the kids. We traveled from Mexico to England seeking political asylum because of our involvement with the student movement or student rebellion and the ensuing massacre made us feel that we had to leave the country. So we settled in England, in London first, and I, as an artist, had to get my work out there. And just around the corner of where we lived on Duncan Terrace in Islington, there was a really rundown, seedy area, and now I think it's completely yuppie. But at that time, it was really seedy. And there was a secondhand store with a duplicator, a Gestetner mimeograph machine. Now, one of the things that we did during the Mexican Rebellion was use that duplicator to produce all sorts of pamphlets and propaganda, agitprop, against the government. And for that, a lot of people went down. So the first thing here that I'm in a free land, Wilson was the then prime minister. I just spent the little money we had and paid 50 quid for that machine. And I learned how to use it even better to make works of mine, graphic art, and try and sell it. I sold it on the streets and in galleries and outside of movies, and I did a lot of things then. And slowly I met more and more people in England, mostly poets, who wanted to publish. And I said, I have this machine at home, we can do it. And that is how it came about that we decided to use that machine to publish ourselves and sell directly. And so when we moved to Devon, because of incidents, my children were bullied because they're dark-skinned, and they were bullied in London. So because of that, we had to leave. We felt we had to leave that circumstance, and we went to Devon because of some friends. Mick Gibbs. I had a show. I had a show with two other colleagues, Richard Kriesche, Austrian artist, and Rodolfo Alcaraz, Laos, a theater man and photographer. And we had a show in Covent Garden, Siggy Krause's framing place, which became a gallery, which was called the Seventh Day Chicken. And David Mayer arrived at that exhibition. We became friends. We were convinced that he convinced us to move, him and Mick, to move to Devon. And we found this beautiful place for 12 quid a week, which made it 48 pounds a month, which was affordable, especially if we could share it. So we shared it with David and later on with Chris Welch and Madeline, and each had their own space and each had their own activity. But we started actually producing books with that one duplicator. Later on, we had a filmmaker, an Australian filmmaker, Felipe Ehrenberg, who now lives in California, I think it's San Francisco. He gave us another duplicator. Then we met Terry Wright, who was a small town printer in Columpton, and they were recently married. They had also money problems, so they came to live with us, and he brought a Jardin press. Then somewhere around there, we found a guillotine and a large man machine, and suddenly we were a printing shop that did everything that needed to be printed in the small town we lived in, and which allowed us to make books by everybody. The only criteria that I think we did apply is whether we liked it or not. Whether, more importantly, whether we liked the people. Because the authors or creators or artists or whatever you want to call them, the deal was that they would make their own books with our machines, and we would go half and half. We would distribute one half of them, they would take away their other half, they would pay for the materials. And I evolved a financial scheme to make the press grow. So that meant that we had to like them, that if they came to make the book and were nice, they could stay and make the book. But if they were dirty or haughty or misbehaved in one way or another, then we couldn't work together. So that was our real criteria, whether we like each other or not. I think we're at that time, much before social networks, before emails, before anything, word of mouth was very important. I had several friends that told me to look up several friends, and those other friends that I looked up led me to other friends. We started the press pretty well a year and a half after we arrived. And that first year and a half, I was desperate. So I went everywhere to open a space for myself as an artist in London, try and get a gallery. Angela Flowers was very respectful of me. I met Richard Hamilton. I did performances at the Tate, and met Stuart Brisley and Ziggy Krause and a whole bunch of people. In that 1.5 years, we are artists, a close-knit community, and I only knew people that were doing things that other people didn't do. We were 24, 25, 26 years of age, and at that age, you're very sociable, you're very excitable, you sit down and drink with friends that talk about 100 things a minute. So, and then David's research into the Fluxus project of Mike Weaver's, that expanded. And because we were a press, and because we were starting to sell in small bookstores and things like that, people got to know us. So, and we became known for our stuff. In other words, it's a two-way road. It's not that you had a lot of contact. I did look and found contact with Latin American artists, Clemente Padin, Ovum Diez, Zavala, a whole bunch. I've always been inclined, unlike other artists in Mexico who looked north in the years of the Cold War in the 50s and 60s, I always turned my eyes south. So I made a lot of contacts with the Brazilian artists, Rubens Gershman, Gershman, really, it shouldn't be said in English, it should be said in Portuguese, and Claudio Tossi, and Paolo Bruschi. Enfin, we started making a lot of contacts. One thing always leads to the next one. I evolved. I mean, you can't do this without, there weren't any endowments for the arts. There were no patrons for that sort of thing. you were cut loose as an artist, and you had to do things, and you had to figure it out. Now, one of the things is that the art world was less of a ghetto then than it is now with modern art, with a globalized art fair system, with curators. Curators didn't exist at that time. There were a couple of art critics and art writers, and we just put on our soft shoes and walked the streets and convinced bookstores to take on our magazines, and we figured out that most of these things would be interesting to art school bookstores or libraries. And our editions were short runs. They were anywhere between 4 copies of a book or booklet or pamphlet or something to, at very, very most, 200 copies. Now, with a list of 8,000 names, bookstores in Europe, in the United States, all of England, private people, strange collectors like Jane Brown, it was almost practically impossible not to sell out everything. If you publish 20 and you offer it to 8,000 people, you will find 20 people to buy that. We were basically, was Chris Welch and Madeline, Martha, myself, and our 2 children, who helped. David on his own until Takako came. That makes about 8 people. And whoever came and made their books sometimes came alone, sometimes came with their family, or sometimes came with their wives or husbands. So say we were about, and then Terry Wright and Pat, so that makes 10 people. So now you have a small, tiny community living under one roof and working day and night. And the labor division was absolutely very clear, and we all supported each other. Roughly speaking, the core of the whole community was Mama Martha, because the kids were small. They were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and they needed all the protection and care. And everybody liked them, by the way. They were nice kids. And Martha made it a very hospitable place. We all chipped in and washed dishes and washed our own clothes and everything. But she was really the mother of the whole community. David is a task freak. He was the one that compiled the list of 8,000. He wrote a lot of letters. And then Chris was an excellent draftsman, and we needed a lot of handwork. I designed a lot of the frames to bind, and the printing processes. I'd been an apprentice printer when I was younger, and when we met Terry, he was an experienced, old-fashioned printer who freaked out with the stuff we were doing with a duplicator. He brought his own machine. Anyway, the work division was quite clear, and when an artist came or an author came, every one of us had to help him one way or another, and he had to chip in and wash dishes and whatever, sweep his room, right, or her room, whatever. But it was quite clear. I think I was the taskmaster. I was the general coordinator of all the works to be done, and everybody exerted some different sort of very pleasurable pressure. Chris would remember something. We have to do this. Okay, then I would sit down and design a way to do what we had to do, according to Chris, and things like that. It just all worked out very well. We had quarreled very little, but we had quarrels, and the understanding that they were inevitable. Like in any married couple, when you love each other, a quarrel is just a quarrel. It's something that, happens. And those things did happen, and nothing happened. In other words, we kept on working. every one of the productions we made had to be solved one way or another. I feel, for example, that Parts of a Bawdy House book and Arguments are both very important books. Arguments was very easy to make, no problem to make. Whereas Parts of a Bawdy House book, Carolee Schneeman's book, that was a complicated one, and it was a very enjoyable complications that arose. But there's no such thing as a favorite book. I published my own books, and some of them I don't like as much as the ones I did with other people. I did some very nice books there. Generation Book 1, which is by street photographers during 17 years. And it's incredible what happened after that. Because when it became known in Cuba, I was a member in Mexico. When I went back to Mexico, I became a founding member of the Mexican Council of Photography. And as such, we organized the first Latin American photography encounter. And that brought us to Cuba. And I took some of my photographic work and my book of photographs, Generation Book 1. It was remarkable because there were still street photographers in Cuba, and the serious revolutionary photographers had never paid attention to them. But the book inspired them so much that they started paying attention to that, which in turn produced a couple of North Americans went to Guatemala and made a beautiful book on street photography there. But the first book was the one we printed at Beau Geste. Beau Geste Press resonated in different manners after the initial impetus of 6 years, 5 years of really intense, passionate production. It went on and affected each one of us differently.